Dershowitz.
First of all, you are as smart as Alan Dershowitz, and don't let anybody ever tell you you're not. People are smart in different ways. I can tell from the three of you, from the questions you've asked, you're very, very smart. I don't care what your teachers tell you, but you're smart.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Mislaibeled. We are here with an extremely, extremely special guest, probably the most hyped thus far, and we're very gracious for him to give us our home, to give us his home and his time. But before we get there, a couple quick things. If you're enjoying our content, please like, subscribe, and comment. We are putting in a lot of work, so that would mean the world to us. Number two, this episode is sponsored by E&A Tax Advisors. E&A Tax Advisors is a tax strategy company that helps you limit your liability surrounding taxes. I use them. Fantastic. Reach out to Ellie at certifiedtaxadvisors.com. Exact email in the description with a number. And yeah, I wouldn't recommend something that I haven't used. They saved me a ton of money. Okay. I'm getting good at it. I want to introduce our guest, who was really gracious enough to give us his time. I know, Alan, I drove you crazy. I'm known to do that, by the way. So I want to thank you for not getting too annoyed by me and allowing us into your home again. And I want to just start very quickly with, can you just share with us, start from the beginning, childhood. Where did you grow up, and what kind of home did you grow up in, and what area of the United States?
I was born in the Williamsburg Orthodox Jewish community of Brooklyn. We then moved to Borough Park, modern Orthodox community, when I was 4 or 5 years old. Grew up in Borough Park, went to high school in Crown Heights and Flatbush, and then to Brooklyn College. And then when I graduated Brooklyn College, basically left New York, went to Yale Law School for 3 years, Washington, D.C. to be a law clerk on the Supreme Court. And since then, 50 years in Cambridge teaching at Harvard. And now the last 10 years kind of semi-retired, but getting into more trouble than I ever got before.
It's funny you say that. First of all, it sounds like we grew up on the same block, probably, based on that all of us. I mean, they're from Cleveland, the truth is. But a lot of people listening to this are from Brooklyn, from Williamsburg, from, the classic Hamish Jews listening. So shout out to y'all. But I actually read that you were basically a big troublemaker when you were growing up. Is that true?
A bandit.
A bandit.
And my high school principal said, Dershowitz, you got a good mouth on you, but a Yiddishe Kup, a Jewish brain you don't have. So you should go into a field that you have to talk a lot, but you don't have to think a lot. And he said he had two suggestions. One was to be a lawyer, and the other was to be a conservative rabbi. That was the greatest insult he could level at somebody, to be a conservative rabbi. He couldn't even pronounce the word reform.
That's hilarious. Well, it seems like the attorney piece worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
That's so funny. I would think that to be a lawyer, you have to be very smart. You have to think a lot. It's not just about, talking.
Well, I think I was pretty smart, except the principal wasn't. And he, got the job through nepotism and was not a particularly smart guy or good guy. I had a mediocre education, but I did a lot on my own. Went to the New York Public Library a lot, Grand Army Plaza in Brooklyn.
Sure.
And I really thrived once I got to Brooklyn College. So here's the data. I was, I think, 43rd or 44th in my class out of 52 students, so really the bottom 10%. And then I was first in my class at Brooklyn College, first in my class at Yale Law School. So there was a pretty big jump from worst to first in a very, very short period of time. Wow. 1955, I was the worst. By 1959, I was president of the student government. I was admitted to Yale. I was magna cum laude. I had all the great honors. And I think part of it was leaving the influence of the very Orthodox Jews. I love Orthodoxy. I go to an Orthodox synagogue. In fact, I'm writing a book now. It's called Why I Daven Like an Orthodox Jew, Think Like an Agnostic, and Behave Like an Atheist. And that's my religious perspective as summarized. Let me tell you why I say I think I behave like an atheist. I'm an agnostic. I'm an agnostic about everything. I don't believe in evolution completely. I don't believe in, Torah Sinai completely. I don't believe in anything. So I'm an agnostic about everything. But why do I say I behave like an atheist? I was once on an airplane. I was bringing my son back from college. I took my son to college. I was flying back from Denver. We get into the air 15,000 feet. The pilot says we have a serious, serious problem. If we have anybody with experience in disaster control, people came, we got reassigned our seats. We had to take our belt buckles off, our glasses. They taught us the brace position. They said in 1 hour, we will do a crash landing. We hope everybody will survive, but it's going to be a serious matter. and half the people on the plane, prayed, rosaries. It never occurred to me to think of God during that crucial period of time. So people say there's no such thing as an atheist in the foxhole. I think I was an atheist in the foxhole. Now, I'd love to be wrong. I'd love someday to come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, oops, sorry, I messed up.
Right.
But Thomas Jefferson said to his nephew, if you mess up and you don't believe in God, God will still reward you for working it through on your own. After all, he gave you intelligence. And so I think about these things all the time. God is an important part of my life only because I think about it a lot, not because I obey all of God's commands. I obey some of them, the ones that I think are right.
Wow, that's actually
a great answer. I know you definitely keep one thing, because there's a beautiful mezuzah on the door.
Oh, yeah. Now, I have a collection of mezuzahs. I have a Chagall mezuzah, and I give mezuzahs as gifts. When friends of mine move into new homes, I give them a mezuzah, even if they're not Jewish. If they're not Jewish, I take the scroll out. But I give them the cover.
Right.
But if they're Jewish, I give them the mezuzah with the scroll.
Love that.
That's nice.
That's so
beautiful.
cool. So I want to jump to the obvious question I think that everyone has. It's not really a profound one, but still I'm curious to hear your answer. And that is for all criminal defense attorneys, how do you live with or work through, from an intellectual standpoint of defending, obviously, a lot of people, let's just probably call it, are most likely probably did the crime, right?
Almost certainly.
Almost certainly. Even
Almost
better.
certainly. I would say most of my defendants were almost certainly guilty of something. Not all of them. I defended 2 boys on death row who were about to get the death penalty, and they were innocent.
Right. So
I've defended other people. I can't name them because then you'll think the ones I didn't name are guilty. But I do defend a lot of people knowing they're guilty. When I take the case in the beginning, I don't know whether they're guilty. For example, I thought Klaus von Bülow was guilty when I took his case originally, and then I basically changed my mind. I've had that happen a few times, but you ask me, how can I live with myself? I go back to Bereshit, and I listen to Avraham Avinu say to Hashem, Chalila lecha, shofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. God, how dare you not do justice to the innocent? What if there are 50 innocent among the guilty of Saddam? First lawyer in history to defend the guilty, and then so many other people over history have defended the guilty. John Adams, Thurgood Marshall, my heroes. And I know it doesn't make me popular, but I have to do it because I was a law professor with tenure, so I have no excuse. I would teach my students, everybody deserves a defense. And then if they come to me, I say, no, I'm too big shot to defend you. No, if I'm going to teach that you have to have a defense, I have to practice what I preach. I live my life by principles, and those principles sometimes get me into problems. I defended a lot of people who are unpopular. I guess the second and third most unpopular people I defended were O.J. Simpson and Jeffrey Epstein. But neither of them compare in any way to Donald Trump. When I defended Donald Trump on the floor of the Senate against what I firmly believe to this day was an unconstitutional impeachment, the first impeachment, I didn't represent him in the second impeachment, I lost my friends. All the people on Martha's Vineyard stopped talking to us. Caroline Kennedy sat next to me at a dinner party and said, if I knew you were invited, I never would have come.
Wow.
My wife was working out in a gym, and somebody on Martha's Vineyard said, oh my God, that's Alan Dershowitz's wife. I can't be in the same room with her.
And this didn't happen after OJ.
No, nothing
who
like that.
Most people firmly believe did murder.
But that nobody cares. Nobody cares. They only
Trump.
care about Donald Trump. And
Do you have any insight into why that is? Why? Well,
yeah, I think people think he was a great danger to America, and I didn't vote for him. I voted against him twice, and I'm looking forward to an opportunity to vote against him for the third time, unless he doesn't get the nomination. But I don't pick and choose. I think of myself as a doctor in the emergency ward. If the head of the mafia gets rolled in
Pull
with,
the mics a little bit closer to you, Alan.
Yeah.
You could pull it. Yep, just like that. Perfect.
so you think yourself like a ER doctor?
I think of myself like an emergency room doctor. In fact, it's interesting because my daughter-in-law once had Mike Tyson roll in. She's an emergency room doctor, and she treated him, and I defended him, and along with my son. So, I defended Nazis and their right to march through Skokie. Of course, I hate Nazis. And the only case I turned down, really, was a man named Radovan Karadzic, who was one of the people who was involved in the massacres in the former Yugoslavia. I turned him down because he was a fugitive. He was escaping, and he called me from his fugitivity and asked me to defend him. And I said, I don't defend fugitives. If you surrender, then I'll maybe defend you. But then he surrendered, and I went to see him, and we couldn't agree on his defense, so I didn't defend him. There have been a few others I couldn't agree. I'll give you another example. I was supposed to have lunch on a Tuesday with Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin of Israel, and the Saturday night before I was supposed to have lunch with him in Boston, he was murdered, assassinated. A week later, the family of the assassin came to see me without any kind of an invitation or anything, and said they wanted me to defend him. And I said, well, what's your defense? I said, if you say he didn't do it, that it's a wrong identification, I would seriously consider it. And they said, no, he did it. We're very proud of it. We think he had a right to do it under the halacha of din rodef, the rule of rodef, that you're allowed to kill somebody in anticipation of them doing harm. And I said, no, I would not defend him on that ground. So I have my
because you disagreed with those grounds.
Well, I think it's appalling to allow somebody to take the law into your own hands. You can kill anybody on that basis.
Wait, no, I was going to ask, you don't know when you take on these cases, you genuinely the whole time, does your client ever tell you, hey, I did it or didn't do it?
I've had one case involving the Jewish Defense League back in the 1970s, early 70s, where the client admitted to me he did it, and we won the case on constitutional grounds. Mostly the clients say, absolutely, they didn't do it. Maybe once the evidence comes out, they're willing to say, well, we did it, but it was an accident, or we did it, but there was a justification. But no other client has ever said, I did it, and I want you to defend me.
What would happen in a scenario where that happened, where that occurred?
Right. What's the loss with them saying the truth?
I just couldn't turn them in. I mean, I couldn't.
You wouldn't be able to take them on.
I could take them on, but I wouldn't let him take the stand. I couldn't ever allow a client to lie on the witness stand. So if I knew he did it, then we would have to defend the case on other grounds. In the O.J. Simpson case, he didn't take the stand.
Right.
We defended him on grounds of police misconduct, and we won that case. And many of my other cases involve police misconduct, the kind of thing that we're now seeing coming to the fore with all these horrible cases of police killings. So I was one of the first to use police misconduct as a defense in many cases. In the Jewish Defense League case, I used FBI misconduct, and we won the case.
So what's so interesting to me is that you, as one of the top lawyers in the country, right? When you take on a client, right? You take on someone to defend. They don't come to you and say, hey, Alan, what do you believe? Hey, Mr. Dershowitz, doctor,
well,
what do you believe is the best way for me to get out of this? They have grounds as to which they want to be defended?
It varies. Sometimes they'll say, I just want to get out of it the lowest sentence. Tell you a story. So Mike Tyson asked me to come to see him the night before he was going to go to jail. I didn't do his trial. And he said to me, all right, before we talk about anything, I want to know, do you think I'm innocent? I said, Mike, I have no idea. I didn't read the record. I would be a fool if I told you I thought you were innocent just because I want the case. No, I can't tell you that. So he said, all right. That's legal stuff. Tell me, what do you think of me as a person? I said, Mike, you're a schmuck. He looked at me, his handlers looked at me, he said, what are you calling him a schmuck? I said, you went to a hotel room at 3 o'clock in the morning with a money-hungry young woman who you didn't know, without any witnesses, and you allowed yourself to get into this situation. You're a schmuck. And then he turned to his handlers and said, why didn't you tell me I was a schmuck? Maybe you could have avoided all this. And, you can be a schmuck sometimes. Look, I defended Jeffrey Epstein. When I first learned about his case, he was charged only with 2 instances. One of having sex with a young woman who was over the age of 18, and the other with one who was 17 and a half. And that's what we pleaded him to. That's what he pleaded. There were no dozens and dozens and dozens of women. Once the case obviously developed, we learned that he did a lot of much, much, much worse things.
I wanted to ask you about that because you had a personal relationship with Jeffrey.
I did.
And from what I've read, academic, but from what I read, and then there's people are dichotomous. People have different. It sounds like you admired his intellect and you liked bouncing ideas off him.
I did. I used to send them drafts of my book. I used to go to his seminars.
What did that feel like to find out that someone that you respected was a monster?
But remember, he met Queen Elizabeth. I mean, he was friends with the president and provost of Harvard. He was friends with Bill Gates after he got in trouble. But talking about the people who he was friends with before his horrible background was revealed, some of the most eminent Nobel Prize winners, and I was just one of them. I would sit in the seminar. I actually presented a paper once at the seminar, and he ripped it apart.
He was brilliant. He was a brilliant intellect.
Clever, street smarts from Brooklyn. From Coney Island.
Yiddishe Kup, what someone would say.
Well, I hope not. I hope a Yiddishe Kup
Not a Yiddishe neshama.
has more seichel than that.
Right.
No, he was a genuine schmuck in many ways. He just thought he could get away with everything. And, he lied to us, of course, repeatedly and minimized what he was doing. And we had no basis for
Do you tell your clients, hey, do not lie to me, tell me everything?
Absolutely. Oh, of course.
But they can't admit, like if they tell you everything, then they could just, in theory, admit to it.
If they admit to it, that's fine. But that just means they can't take the witness stand.
Right.
And I tell them that. And mostly they don't admit it.
Well, very.
Where does this come from? This you seem to be someone who has the desire to see what some people call like the worst people, people who've really done real crime, and you say, but like, does this come from a belief in the Constitution? Where does this come from? This idea that you deserve my best work right now to get you off.
Well, the only work I ever do is my best work. I mean, no surgeon would ever do anything but their best work. Once I take the case, I stop at nothing ethical or legal or proper to win the case. I do it first because of my history as a Jew. Jews needed defense lawyers all through history, and they needed to be defended. And they weren't defended. Just last night, my wife and I watched the great Roman Polanski film about Jacques Hughes, about Dreyfus, the Dreyfus affair, a Jewish man who was totally erroneously convicted. And then I became a victim of that myself. And I was falsely accused by a woman I never met, never heard of. Finally, she's made the following statement. I now recognize that I may have made a mistake in identifying Alan Dershowitz. 8 years, she claimed that she had sex. Man, never met her, never heard of her. And finally, she acknowledged that she may have made a mistake. But, having been falsely accused gave me a lot of sympathy. Defendants who are falsely accused. And I'm going to spend more of my time now defending falsely accused people.
Cool. Yeah, I want to just, harp on that for a second. We're in a day and age, especially with the Me Too movement that happened over the last 3-4 years, where it seems clearly like, the problem really seems to be that once you make an accusation, first of all, the person, you're now known by that, even though it's not true.
Oh, you should see my emails every day. Pedophile. They attack me. Even though she recognizes that she may have made a mistake, they still attack me. You can't get rid of that label once it's been attached to you. And that's why I have to fight back. I was lucky. I could fight back because I have nothing to hide. I have lived a completely reputable sexual and romantic life from the day I met my wife, Carolyn, until today.
Right.
And I never had anything during the time I knew Jeffrey Epstein. I never touched another woman. I certainly never would have had anything to do with somebody like that. I never did. I never heard of her. And so for me, it wasn't one of these gray cases. Well, you had sex. Maybe it was consensual. Maybe it wasn't. A lot of the Me Too cases are that.
Yeah.
In my case, one of us was committing perjury and belongs in prison.
Wow.
And it wasn't me.
Wow. So, first of all, if you believe she committed perjury and now she went back on it, does she not deserve a prosecution of some sort?
I would hope so, but I don't know. But people are terrified to go after, quote, alleged victims, because they'll be called shaming victims.
Right.
And so some women, I'm not talking about my accuser right now, but some victims make a living out of doing this. In my case, she made almost $20 million, between $10 and $20 million.
How did she make that money?
By getting settlements from people.
Oh, with other people.
Not me. I never gave her a nickel.
Oh, got it. So, but I just want to go back to the Me Too movement concept. It seems like a lot of times now there's just this guilty before proven innocent.
That's right.
Concept.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Could you just expound on how
it has to change? And the only way to change it is to put some people in jail. When people start making false accusation and they're proved to be false, they have to go to prison and their lawyers have to be disbarred if the lawyers were part of it. That's the only way to stop it. Otherwise, these people are making fortunes. I have a friend who's a California lawyer. She says she's writing $100,000 checks every week by Hollywood stars who have been falsely accused but don't want to have the publicity.
Right.
$100,000 is cheap.
Right. Now, I was more talking from a societal-based standpoint, not just really in individual cases. Just like we're in a society now where the whole, like I'm saying, the whole society is run on a basis of like guilty before proven.
No, it depends. Look, take Trump. He's either the greatest person in the history of the world who never did anything wrong, or the worst monster ever in American history. Nobody has a nuanced view. If you're a Trumper, then he's innocent, no matter how many times he's been accused. And if you're an anti-Trumper, he's guilty, even if he has never been accused. So it's not always everybody is presumed guilty. I was presumed guilty in large part because I had defended Jeffrey Epstein and people wanted me to be guilty.
Right.
But almost nobody believed it. For example, the rabbi of Temple Emmanuel in New York, the largest, most...
I was there this Friday night.
Yeah? Yeah. Well, I urge you not to go back. So the rabbi, who's a decent guy, had asked me for the last 7 or 8 years to do trials of biblical characters. So I put Abraham on trial, Moses, David.
That's fascinating.
And it was great. We got 1,600 people. Then he called me and said, we can't have you anymore. You've been canceled. Even though we all believe you didn't do it. We all know you're innocent. But, quote, we don't want trouble. So he canceled me. The 92nd Street Y canceled me. The Ramaz school canceled me. The Jewish leadership has been abominable on this issue. They have been among the worst because they have such high status in America. They don't want to endanger it. They don't want to get in trouble. It's the same phenomenon that has existed throughout history. The highest ranking Jews don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to live by principle. They want to live by pragmatism and what will preserve their status.
Yeah, that's very well said. But my question back to you is, wouldn't you say, I mean, clearly you're not a Trump fan, and I have a nuanced view on Trump. I really think, I actually talk about it with Shmuley all the time. I have a nuanced view. I think the one thing he got right was the ability to fight back, and people that did accuse, he was willing to do that, right?
He was, yeah.
I think that's what made him palatable.
Well, I wrote a book that clearly describes his attitude. The name of my book was Chutzpah, and he has a lot of chutzpah. And he fights back, and I admire him for that. Now, he should not have fought back against losing the election because he lost the elections fair and square.
Right.
And I think that hurt his reputation enormously. And I think if there's one reason he won't be the next president, it's because of what he did on January 6th.
Right.
I would say also, just want to chime in here, one thing Zach said earlier, in terms of defending, as a criminal attorney, you also don't know at the end of the day, because they're not admitting, you don't know whether they did it or not. You can have a hunch, but at the end of the day, everyone deserves a defense, because at the end of the day, if they're not admitting it to you, what's your say to say that they're not innocent before proven guilty?
I agree with part of what you said. In the beginning of the case, you can't really tell. I mean, in some cases you can, but in most cases you can't really tell. You have the Chauvin case of George Floyd. Right. Just see the video and he's guilty. But in most cases, you don't know at the beginning. By the end of the case, I generally have a pretty good idea. It's more than a hunch because I've seen all the evidence. I know as much as the prosecution knows. And often it's a gray area. Often the prosecution says, he committed first-degree murder. The defense says he was innocent. And the truth is manslaughter maybe, or second-degree murder. Right. So in a lot of cases, it's not black and white. It's not clear. It's somewhere in the middle, particularly if you have intent crimes where the mental element is critical.
And there's one thing. What is the range of emotions as a lawyer from the beginning to the end of that, finding out all the evidence and things of that nature?
Well, again, you have to be like a surgeon. When you're in the courtroom, you have to be on the operating table. You can't allow your emotions. I get so mad at judges sometimes. Do you ever see the movie Injustice for All? When Pacino goes after the judges, and really yells at them. I feel like doing that all the time. You schmucks, you idiots, what are you telling me? But I can't. I'm representing a client. And so you have to control your emotions.
I was going to say, by the way, all along, this whole you cut out emotion from this and just look at the intellectual side, which is the way it should be done.
Try your best.
You try your best, but that has probably made you an extremely wiser person. The ability to control emotion and, be in control of that aspect and not react, right? And be proactive towards our emotions and not reactive towards them. It must be something that's been a real learning experience for you.
And it's hard because I'm an emotional person. I have very strong beliefs and strong values. And the people I love with a passion. And the people I hate with a passion. So I have a lot of emotions, but I have to keep them in check when I'm in court, when I'm defending somebody.
Love it. Can we jump to Israel for a second?
Sure,
because I know you're proud Jew, very pro-Israel.
Right.
What were your thoughts actually on Donald Trump's, his administration's approach to it? You know, I was obviously a very different approach to the Middle East plan.
Good. Excellent. I worked with him on the Palestinian proposal. I worked on the Abraham Accords.
So you did.
I met with Donald Trump and the Emir of Qatar in order to try to neutralize them, not to have them oppose the progress that was being made in the Middle East. So I'm a big fan of what Trump did. I was there when the embassy opened in Jerusalem. I was invited. I was the only person invited both by Netanyahu and by Trump.
Wow.
So I got a front row seat, and it was a great event. And I gave Trump advice on the Golan Heights. The advice I gave him was this. I said, has anybody ever returned a battleship captured in the middle of a war so that the battleship can continue to fire on soldiers? And he said, no, of course not. And I said, that's what the Golan Heights is. It's a battleship.
Yeah.
It's a very high area, and they look down at Israeli civilians, and he used that analogy. So I was very proud of myself. So look, I have mixed feelings about almost everybody.
Right.
I certainly have mixed feelings about Donald Trump.
And it seems also, as a lawyer, you have to keep your emotions in check and you're very logical about it. Do you think that it has anything to do, and I know I'm taking this a little bit far, to your relationship with God and your relationship in terms of spirituality as well? Because that emotion and logic, a lot of times, it's difficult, spirituality, to bring logic to it, because a lot of it is something that is very emotion-based.
You're right. And that's probably why, inevitably, I'm an agnostic. Because I just wrote an article, why you cannot disprove the existence of God. It's impossible to disprove it. And those who try to disprove it are as wrong as those who try to scientifically prove it. It's a question of faith. Right. And look, I don't care how smart you are. Nobody can understand how something could have come from nothing. The Big Bang Theory doesn't explain that. It says there was something small and it became big. Evolution doesn't explain that. You know, there was a one-cell amoeba and it became human beings. But nobody can explain how something came from nothing. And of course, religion explains that. And tohu vavohu, it was all over the place. And it was creation. So I'm not jumping to any conclusions, but I can't help but think about everything rationally.
Can you explain why you see yourself as such a big Zionist and so pro-Israel? Obviously, this question's in response to all the people that talk about the occupation or so-called occupation.
The occupation is 100% the fault of the Palestinians. They could have had their own state with no occupation. In 1938, the Peel Report. 1948, the division by the United Nations. 1967, 1990, 2000, 2001, 2005, 2008, and the Palestinians said no every time. So if you're occupied, it's not like the Chinese are occupying parts of other ethnic groups. The Palestinians asked for it. They couldn't take yes for an answer. And it's completely the fault of the Palestinian leadership. And I had a long talk with Abbas one night, the head of, and he admitted to me that the Palestinians were wrong in turning down the division in 48, and he wished he had the opportunity to go back to 2000, 2001, when Arafat turned down the most generous peace offer. So put the blame where it belongs. It belongs squarely on the head of the Palestinians. It belongs squarely on the heads of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Organization, which has kept Palestinians in camps. And, you know, the Israelis, could they have done better? Of course, any country could have done better. But the fault is entirely on the part of the Palestinians.
That's a hard take.
Sorry.
No, it's a strong take.
Yeah,
I respect
I believe it.
Speaking about Israel and Judaism, and during my research for this, I read that you yourself, I think you wrote about it in your book Chutzpah, that you experienced they're like law firms. There was anti-Semitism in law firms, which is, for people from our generation, kind of hard to understand, because what do you mean? Like, they're all Jews. But
well, I was first in my class at Yale. I was a Supreme Court law clerk to be, and I was the editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal. That would make me the #1 draft choice in the NBA or the NFL. Every law school in the country wanted me to teach there. I got offers from every single law school in the country. But I went to 32 Wall Street firms, and every one of them turned me down.
32?
32 Wall Street firms.
And you think that there was an anti-Semitic aspect to that?
No, it was purely anti-Semitic, not an aspect.
But if you were defending someone other than yourself who was saying that what would you say? Meaning, how can you define that? How can you say that definitively? That's my only question.
They've all admitted it now. Later on, they apologized. Oh yeah, they all apologized, and they, now they hire Jews all the time. My son graduated Yale 25 years after me, and he got all the jobs he wanted.
Well,
so
I was gearing up towards something here, which is, some would say that anti-Semitism is trending now. Again,
a different kind.
But where do you think that's coming from? And how does it compare to the anti-Semitism of your day?
Anti-Semitism of my day was polite anti-Semitism, top-down anti-Semitism. You knew where you weren't wanted. You knew you couldn't get a job in Metropolitan Life. You knew you couldn't get a job at AT&T. You knew you couldn't live in certain neighborhoods of Westchester. You knew you couldn't get into social clubs. You knew it, but it was from the top down. You knew you couldn't be president of the United States, and you knew all that. But today, the anti-Semitism is bottom up. It comes from violent people, from bigots, from people who are utterly impolite.
From what I've seen on the internet, very impolite. Yes.
Yeah. Well, they write to me all the time. I mean, I'm constantly attacked for my Jewishness.
You get like death threats and stuff?
I get death threats. Yeah, but it's very different. The two phenomena are almost not the same.
Do you have any? You know a thing or two. Do you have any advice for what we can do? Societally.
Well, I've suggested a few things. I've suggested an organization that of lawyers that is roughly entitled "Hit a Jew, We Sue You," and getting 100 really good lawyers not to let a single person get away with a single anti-Semitic act. As soon as a person is caught with an anti-Semitic act, because the police almost never prosecute, we'll sue them. We'll take away their car.
Oh, interesting, because the police won't prosecute, so you're just going to go from legal repercussions.
Take away their car, take away their apartment, bankrupt them, make them sleep on the street. I have no sympathy for an anti-Semite.
It's hard to find sympathy for an anti-Semite. Yeah. So, yeah, let's get that organization up and running.
Okay.
I would donate to that organization.
Okay, I'll be one of the lawyers.
There we go.
I'll defend them. Yeah.
I love that. Who are you with? Were you with anyone? I'm sure you're with famous people in Yale. Could you just speak to some of those? I assume some of them have gone on to have.
Well, both Yale and Harvard. And you meet the elite of the elite at those schools. I knew early on in her life Hillary Clinton, and of course I knew Barack Obama. And at Harvard, I would say when I made my speech in front of the Senate, I think I had 10 former students out of the 100 in the Senate who were from Harvard Law School or Yale Law School. So it, met a lot of famous people.
We just recently interviewed Scaramucci. I think he was in Harvard.
He was in my class, yeah.
Scaramucci was in your class,
really? Yeah.
He's a little chutzpah.
He's a boy, I'll tell you. I like him. He was called the Mooch when he was in
Even back then?
Even back then?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And he was very popular. And then, of course, I had a number of justices. Elena Kagan was in my class. Ted Cruz was in my class. Lots and lots of people. But you don't distinguish. First of all, you grade blindly, so you don't know who you're grading. So I have no idea what grades I gave most of these people.
So I wanted to get back also the same way Zach asked about the anti-Semitism and the different culture that there's been. So in the government or in the political aspect of things in that sphere, we're only 28 years old, all of us, 29, right? And so we obviously see the rise of the progressive left and the alt-right, and you had Breitbart News and the what Trump would call the fake news media and all these different things. But we don't really have much to compare it to as young adults. And so we look back, and I look back at like different things of like Clinton's administration from 93 to 01, and you have a lot of, people that were on the Republican side or conservative side that would say, the Clinton presidency wasn't so bad and things of that nature.
That's right.
And nowadays you have the people that are just on the conservative side that would say the Obama presidency was terrible. And you have people on the, on the liberal or side of things or Democrat side of things, I'll say the Trump presidency is terrible. Do you think that has happened recently, or that we're just young kids and we didn't experience?
No, it's happened recently. You didn't miss anything. It's happened mostly recently. Back in the day, before you were born or in your early days, people got along much better. People talked to each other. I remember being at a meeting with Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch, two more different people you couldn't imagine, or with others like that, and they got along. They could talk. And today, people just can't talk to each other. They just scream at each other. We live in an age of bumper stickers and cliches.
Slogans.
Where do you think that stems from?
Well, the world is going through that. The world is experiencing a rise in extremism. It's happening in Israel. The debate over judicial reform is not a good debate. It's been too extreme. Nobody is prepared to sit down and compromise. I have offered myself as somebody to help mediate the differences because I think there's common ground that we could establish, but nobody wants common ground. They just want enemies and they want to be able to fight with each other. Each side wants to say, if they lose, it's the end of democracy. They're all wrong.
Do you think that's perpetuated by anything?
The media, the social media causes all these exaggerations. Yeah.
A couple of quick things. You became a professor at Harvard 28?
Full professor, 28. Assistant professor at 25.
Wow. First of all, who are these teachers that didn't see this coming? Like, they have to be the biggest morons of all time. No?
Didn't see what coming?
I guess you being the full professor of Harvard at 28 because they said you have no brains?
My elementary school. No. The professors all like me. My high school teachers.
Yeah. Whoever it was.
Well, one day I come back to my grandmother. I was in like the 7th grade in elementary school. And I say, Grandma, what is a Shtick Dreck? And my grandmother slapped me on the face. Shtick Dreck? You can't say words like that. It means a piece of shit in Yiddish. I said, well, that's what my teacher called me. And so she ran to the school and told them off in Yiddish. But, people were judged back in the day not by how smart they were, but by how well behaved they were, how much they accepted the religious training. So I was not a good fit for a Jewish school.
Wow. Quick question on Electoral College. You think it's genius or outdated at this point?
Both. I think it was genius at the time and outdated. And I'd like to see it change, but there have to be some other structural changes as well. Changes perhaps in the Senate, changes in other areas of life. But look, the Constitution is filled with mistakes. But on balance, it's a phenomenal document. It strikes the appropriate balance. And, it was never designed for democracy. It was designed to be a republic. And the Electoral College is very anti-democratic, as evidenced by the fact that in 2 elections in your lifetime, the person who got the most popular votes lost the election.
Yeah.
So.
If you could right now make any change to the Constitution, what would it be?
Second Amendment. I would make sure that the states have a right to carefully regulate and thoroughly regulate gun ownership.
Do you think that there's not enough regulation?
Not enough regulation. Not even close. First of all, it's not even clear regulation is going to help. There's too many guns. There are more guns than people in the United States. So the problem may become unsolvable. The only way it could be solved is what happened in a couple of other countries. Massive buyback programs where you offer large sums of money for people to sell their guns back to you. And maybe we can reduce the number of guns to 100 million instead of what we now have.
2023 is already proving to be like the worst year in U.S. shooter history.
So you believe the gun issue is more gun based and the amount that's out there, or is it more people based?
Oh, it's gun based. I think people are the same. People are no different in the United States and in Germany or France or Italy or Great Britain, and or Australia or Canada, and we have such an overwhelmingly higher rate of gun violence. It has to be the guns, not the people.
That's fascinating that you're telling me that based on a lot of your other. Not that I disagree or agree.
He's a registered Democrat.
Honestly, I don't even have an opinion on this because the gun thing is so, you live in New York, you don't know anything about guns.
It's also so wildly complicated. I feel like there's so much, and people make it a whole, either have all the guns off the street or I have my right in NRA, and they don't have any of this nuance.
The night Robert Kennedy was killed, I was working on a proposal for him. I was supporting him for president to control bullets, not guns. Let people own their guns. But let's create technological ways of making sure that, with exceptions, the guns can't be loaded. You have to go to a central place to get the ammunition. I don't know if it would have worked. I was working with an MIT professor, and then, of course, he got killed in the middle of the night by a gun. Just the kind of gun that I was working on.
Writing the proposal? While you were writing the proposal?
While I was writing the proposal.
What are your thoughts about Roe v. Wade being overturned and in general about things going back to the states?
Well, I was not a fan of Roe versus Wade when it first came down. I didn't think there was a real basis in the Constitution. But I'm in favor of a woman's right to choose abortion, and I'd like to have seen it done more politically. But I don't think it should have been overruled. 50-year precedent shouldn't be overruled so quickly.
Wow.
So I was against both Roe originally and also against the overruling of Roe. We're going to have one more question. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Who wants the last question?
I
I got a last one.
Were you close? I'm just gonna jump in because you guys are busy fighting about it. Were you close with the Rebbe? I know
I wasn't close with him. I met him 3 or 4 times, but I wasn't close with him.
What was your impression?
I liked him very much. He was brilliant. We had a big argument about how to deal with Soviet Jewry. I was in favor of mass demonstrations, and he was in favor of behind-the-scenes diplomacy.
Oh, interesting.
And we had good conversations about that. We had conversations about a number of other things. Religion in the schools, whether you should be able to have a non-denominational prayer in the schools, all of those things. So, we didn't agree, but he was an enormous presence. And today, Chabad is the most significant Jewish organization in the United States and around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely did a good job with what he set out to do. That's for sure. He definitely accomplished
Definitely
that.
successful.
Any other spiritual person you ever go to for advice?
My wife.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. She gives me the best advice, and sometimes I even accept it. And when I do, I come out better than when I don't. So I know that, but I don't always accept her advice. I wish I had.
Last thing, for us, for the kids, for all the guys trying to make it, right, who are not as smart maybe as Alan Dershowitz, what advice could you give us as far as temperament and things we could do that are more controllable maybe than just our brains?
First of all, you are as smart as Alan Dershowitz, and don't let anybody ever tell you you're not. People are smart in different ways. I can tell from the 3 of you, from the questions you've asked, you're very, very smart. I don't care what your teachers tell you, but you're smart. And focus on what part of your smarts will make you a more productive and happy person. Because I don't believe in general intelligence. I believe in multiple intelligences, different kinds of intelligence. I was lucky. I figured out early on in my life what I was good at. I'm not good at other things. I can't spell.
Right.
And other things I can't do. I'm not good at computers, but I'm really good at what I do. And I figured it out early, and that's what you have to do. You have to figure out early what you're really good at and what makes you happy.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, sure.
I really enjoyed this. Thanks so much, Alan. I really appreciate it.